Well, welcome. My name is Kees de Lauw. This lecture is about spatial identities. What are these? In the previous lecture I outlined a wide variety of examples. Here on the right hand side you see some pictures I used in that presentation. It has become clear that spatial identities, they don't exist in isolation. First of all, they are linked politically. Power and space are linked through identity discourses. But also spatially, identity discourses are linked to each other. Horizontally, neighboring, for instance, regions have identity discourses which refer to each other. And also vertically across scale, for instance, national, regional and local identity discourses are linked to some extent. There are thus many different spatial identity discourses. But in what way are they similar? Well, what are identities? First of all, it's important to stress that identities are not distinct objects. Individual, places and nations have identities, but they don't exist in isolation from each other. They are related to each other, they have strong relations. First of all, through behavior they are linked. There are several forms of interaction, like for instance the interaction of goods, economic exchanges, the interaction of information, and the exchange of people, through migration for instance. But also important are the power relations through which people and places are linked. On the other hand, another form of relations is the perception people have of each other, of their similarities and differences. These perceptions are based on knowledge, on cognition, but that is a selective knowledge of yourself, but also of others. But also affection is important. The valuation of these differences is an important aspect. This can create feelings of belonging or of difference. And these aspects are important in the creation of identity discourses. But it's important to stress that perception and behavior are not separate from each other, but they reinforce each other. Identities. Isn't it the case that only individuals have identities? Some people state that, but I disagree. Some people stress that identity makes individuals unique and that it helps people to stand out from the crowd. But this is an individual which stands out from the crowd but clearly belongs to the crowd. That's an important aspect. Individual identity is always about the relation between the individual and the outside world. It's always about differentiation from others, about distancing, but also about association, of the stressing of similarities. Identity formation is thus a very social process. And individual and collective identities are linked, and space is an important aspect of this social process. And space, in this respect, is not a neutral container. Collective identities are, for instance, formed on a schoolyard. Here on the right-hand side you see some pictures of a great video about it. It's called Group Identity, In-Group and Out-Group Formation. This is a very interesting case of school children which share many different collective characteristics. Social class, ethnicity, they have the same school uniforms, but still they are divided in groups with different identities. Well, first of all, they are divided in classes, more or less top down, but also bottom up. They form different groups on the schoolyard. Please watch this video, and when you watch this video, try to answer the following questions. Well, this video gave a great introduction to the construction of collective identities. It has become clear that the selection of elements, of specific characteristics and traits are important for the creation of identities. These are mostly positive elements. But also the relation with others is always important. Horizontally, between neighbors, that can be different individuals, groups, places or regions, but also vertically across scales. For instance, an individual belongs to a distinct group or wish to belong to a specific group, and that is can be an important aspect of one's identity. But also spatially, places belong to a region and they can link their identity to that region. or not. It's not only about association, but also about distancing. That distancing or association is linked to different norms, different valuation of differences. Normative valuation are thus an important aspect of all identity discourses. They can result in association, they can result in loyalty or brothering, but they can also result in distancing or competition or othering. Othering is an important aspect when we talk about identity. Here on the right hand side you see a link to a great YouTube video called Edward Said on Orientalism, where Edward Said discusses that concept of othering and how important that is for the creation of identities. Another important aspect of all identities is that they have a time perspective. They have a vision of the past, which is selective and creates a kind of a biography. That can be an individual biography, but it can also be a collective biography. Time perspective is also normative. It can have a vision of development, of improvement, or it can be a vision about decline, the loss of things. They also have a vision of the future. They can have hope for a better future or fear for a kind of dystopia. These are all important elements of identity discourses. Well, how does this work out in reality? Well, this is a picture of reality. It's a picture of a church in Katwijk, which is a very famous church of this fishing village. Well, interestingly, although this is a historic site, how people discuss this site is not linked to the past, but it's linked to the future. And they have very different visions of the future. Some wants to preserve it and even object to the small changes here in front of the church. Others want to transform it even further and want to make it into a tourist venue, which distances itself quite strongly from that traditional Christian closely knit village. But others don't really want to change it. They don't agree with it, but we also interviewed youth in Katwijk, and they walk around in shirts like this. There's a Gothic youth scene in Katwijk, and they accept that it's a Christian village and that they themselves are not accepted in that community. And they don't really object to that. If they want to express their personal identity, they don't go to this place, but go to a different place, as you can read here in this quote. So, although this picture indicates a shared knowledge about the local identity discourse in Katwijk, it's valued quite differently, and it results in many different forms of behavior. Some want to preserve it, some want to change it, while others don't really care. So identities are constructed across scales. Let's try to picture this. Let's start with identity as more or less an empty container, which is related to many different aspects, different elements. And some of those elements are closely related to the identity discourse of an individual or a group, while others are ignored or are linked less strongly or are seen as very important. But the identity of an element is also related to the identity of similar elements. Those similar elements can be seen as a danger, as an other, from which one wants to distance oneself, or as a kind of brother with which one wants to align oneself. But also there are relations with higher scale levels. For instance, a place can distance itself from a region to which it more or less belongs and associates itself to another region which is very much more in alignment with the characteristics of that place. Or it can even relate to a larger region. Well, let's try to fill in this quite abstract scheme. Let's look at the construction of the identity discourse of Katwijk, the fishing village. Katwijk has many distinct elements. Some of those elements are quite strongly associated with the identity discourse of Katwijk, while others are neglected, and some are even quite strongly associated with the identity discourse of Katwijk as a whole. The identity discourse of Katwijk is not only based on its elements, it's also based on relation with its neighborhood. For instance, the city of Leiden, which is close by, is seen as a threat, and Katwijk stresses that it's different from it, and really objects to have strong relations with it. On the other hand, there are many neighboring rural municipalities, with Katwijk has sometimes a very strong relation. Also at a higher scale level, Katwijk is related to the urban region of the Randstad, but really Katwijk doesn't belong to it or doesn't feel that it belongs to it. While on the other hand, the bulb growing region of the Bollenstreek is seen more favorably. But Katwijk really strongly associates with the Netherlands as a whole, as a nation, or at least the Netherlands as it used to be. So what are spatial identities? Well, it's important to stress as a political geographer, they are about the relation between power and space. Spatial identities are used in that power relation. But spatial identities are also very collective phenomena. They are distinct from individual identities, although they are linked to them to some extent, of course. And it's important to stress that they are not fixed facts, but they are changing constructions. They are based on a selection of specific elements, based on a vision of how to relate with neighboring identities on the horizontal level, but also vertically across scales. And they're always about the relation of difference and sameness. And also, time is important. They offer interpretation of the past and visions of the future, of what is allowed, what corresponds with an identity discourse. It has a normative dimension. And spatial identities are always discourses. That means that they are disputed, changeable, and you have many different types of identity discourses. And I'll come back to that in a later lecture.